replaces the worsening 2-hour traffic slog, it is incredible and must be better marketed to the public. I have a proposal on pedestrian and bike safety. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time at this meeting, but I mention it. I hope this is appropriate to consideration requiring LED line jackets to be worn by bike riders at night. I was impressed walking in the dark this morning with the exceptional visibility it afforded the walker at a distance. I would support providing low-cost or subsidized jackets for use on our bike and highway roadways to improve the pedestrian and bike safety. Thank you for your consideration in these comments.
Thank you, Dr. Violash. Are there any other public comments?
No, Chair House, there are no more public comments.
Very well. Are there any member comments, ITALK member comments before we get started? Seeing none, we'll move to our next item, which is the Chief Executive Officer report. Is Mr. Akrata on, or who is going to give that report?
Hey, good morning, Chair House. This is Ray Trainer. I'm not sure if you can hear me or see me.
I can see you and hear you. Good morning, Ray. Welcome.
Excellent, thanks. So I'll be filling in for Hassan this morning and doing my best to channel all of the thoughts that he wanted to share with you and the members of the ITALK. So good to see you all this morning. Appreciate your time. I wanted to begin by talking about the regional plan and just to kind of recap where we are now. So, we spent a number of years pulling together all the data, a lot of public input to really focus on creating a safe, clean, and efficient transportation system for our region. We all know we need it. And I think this plan is bold and really a fresh new vision for how we believe we can achieve those objectives. Last week, we proposed the final plan and the EIR, and on Friday this week, we're going to be asking our board to consider approval of the final plan and the certification of the environmental document. And we just wanted to extend our gratitude to you, members of the committee, the public who have spent so much time talking with us, sharing their ideas, giving us their feedback, to all the stakeholder groups that have spent countless hours poring over the details, talking with our staff, interacting with us, sharing what they like, what they felt we could improve upon. And that brings us to this Friday, and we're quite excited about being able to have incorporated all of the feedback that we've got over the last few years to bring together a brand new proposal for how we can imagine our region's future. And so there have been some feedback lately around the vehicle miles traveled fee. I know a lot of you have paid some attention to that. It's certainly going to be a topic of discussion. This Friday, we've got a separate item on the agenda. You probably noticed that the board had directed us to put on to begin to contemplate what our future transportation plan might look like in light of the available funding now that's going to be coming from Washington, D.C. Through the state as a part of the new IIJA that President Biden had signed just last month. So we're excited about the opportunity that we face to continue this very important public discourse on policy and direction and investment strategy. And we have still received comments up until, and we expect to receive more comments up until just before we go live on Friday. We wanted to urge everybody who still has an interest in providing information, even though the public comment period has ended, we are still collecting comments. And we want to encourage you to use the email address sdforward@sandag.org. That's the best way to communicate with us. We know that there's been other organizations and individuals sharing email addresses to collect feedback on the regional plan. The official opportunity to provide SANDAG and to get sure that all that information is routed to our board is to sdforward@sandag.org. And then the last thing about the plan, the meeting that takes place this Friday does start a little earlier than normal. So we're going to be starting the meeting at 8:30 a.m. this Friday. So we urge all of you to join us for what we imagine to be a momentous occasion as we think about the blueprint for our future transportation system. So another topic that I know is near and dear to each of you on the committee is funding. And we talk a lot about the TransNet funding sources with you. And I think each of you will recall that shortly after Hassan joined Sandag, he made it very clear that the TransNet funding was really not going to be sufficient to pay for all the projects that we thought we needed so many years ago when the voters were first asked whether they would want to support the vote of a 0.5-cent sales tax. Now, since that time, we've engaged in a number of discussions, and some of them have been really challenging. We're not going to shy away from those difficult discussions. In fact, Ariana has been bringing conversations to you about a number of concepts regarding the ordinance and some amendments, some of which have come about because of the auditors that have reviewed the ITALK program or the TransNet program, feedback that we've received from our member agencies, feedback we've received from you, and feedback that we've received from our board. Last week, my colleague Ray Major shared the latest forecast when it came to the TransNet revenues and went through category by category with the board of directors. And that was really the best holistic view we think that we've provided as of late to our current board, just to make sure that they understand the status from a revenue perspective, along with some of the financial commitments in each of those categories, so that we could begin this robust conversation about what to do with respect to the TransNet ordinance. Since 2008, we've been able to utilize those local funds to bring in nearly $7 billion of both state and federal matching funds. And so we're very excited about the prospects that still remain with the remaining funds that are in the program. But as all of you are aware, costs have continued to go up, and we really need to be realistic about what we can and we can't do. And we can't keep kicking the can down the road. That's why we created the 2021 regional plan, to take a fresh new look, to hit the reset button, if you will, on some of these concepts and begin to formulate realistic plans for our future. And like we mentioned, the regional plan really does take a bold set of actions, but it's also going to require a lot of commitments on the behalf of the residents of our region in order to be able to achieve all the objectives that we've got. And so we're very excited about the prospects of the new federal infrastructure bill. I think that gives us an opportunity to take a hard look at the TransNet program, how we can best use it to leverage the new federal funds that we expect to be coming down. We believe our region is going to be highly competitive on some of these grant opportunities. We recognize that there's going to be a lot of new formula funds that should significantly increase some of the core programs that we've historically received. So this really, I think, kind of magnifies the opportunities that we've got. And we know that there's a lot of questions, and so we're really happy that people are really talking about this. And so between now and the springtime, we're going to continue to have these conversations. And then, of course, you're going to be vitally involved in that process as we begin to contemplate what needs to change with respect to the ordinance before we bring that back to the board of directors after you as a committee have thoroughly examined all these opportunities that we're talking about. One thing I wanted to bring to your awareness was a pretty innovative project that has been in development for the last few years, and that's the Bus on Shoulder pilot. Many of you might be aware that we've been using some federal grant funds from the Federal Transit Administration to equip the South Bay Rapid buses with some advanced technology, as well as some roadside technology to help us reduce the travel times for those travelers on South Bay Rapid as they traverse the very crowded 805 corridor. So this week, you might have seen the press release that we began some driver training, and this is affording the drivers of those rapid vehicles some specialized training on how to be able to navigate those buses and use these new shoulders for this hard shoulder running concept, where when the traffic becomes very congested, the drivers have the opportunity to move the bus into the shoulder, bypass some of that congestion, and then move back into the lanes before they make their transition to State Route 94 and into downtown. And so this has been a joint effort between Sandag, Caltrans, and the Metropolitan Transit System. And we've been able to now start the driver training this week. They made some really good progress. And our whole aim here is to really improve the travel time reliability and of course, continue to move those buses through the very congested corridor. And I think one of the things that Hassan wanted you to all be aware of is this is our region's first use of connected vehicle technology that provides a connection between the vehicles themselves and our roadside infrastructure. And so we're quite thrilled about the prospects that this pilot's going to afford us. And as we think about the regional plan, we've got several instances where we believe the connected vehicle technology has application for us to address a lot of the issues that we face. And we think that the connected vehicle technology is going to be one of the several technologies that's going to help us to be able to rely on the ability of our existing roadway infrastructure to squeeze the most capacity out of it as possible. And then the last thing, and I don't know if my colleague Jim is on or not, Jim, we did celebrate the grand opening of the project that you and your team so capably led over the last 5 years. And so we're very excited now. And I don't know, Jim, you were there and had an opportunity to see the 8,500 attendees. And we were really honored to have a number of our elected officials, of course, Congressman Scott Peters, Congressman Vargas joined us. We had the FTA Administrator, Nuria Fernandez there. We also were joined by Senator Alex Padilla. He brought in some virtual remarks. There were so many members of our communities there and our partners, which would be, of course, the Metropolitan Transit System, Caltrans, and UC San Diego, all made this possible. And I think for those of you on the committee that were in attendance, I think you can recognize that we've really not had a grand opening, anything like this. This was just a wonderful celebration and something that was really befitting of our region. The work that Jim and his team have done over these last years is really incalculable in terms of how significant this project is, having delivered it on time and on budget. And I know that many of you who've been around the infrastructure world for a while recognize that mega projects like this is pretty unheard of, to see a project be delivered of this magnitude on time and on budget. And so we want to celebrate not just the project and our partners, but the magnificent team here at Sandag that so capably delivered this work. And so we're really excited, Chair House, to be able to kind of close the director's report on that high note. And we're looking forward to being able to see what comes next as we start to move forward this Friday with the advent of our work on the regional plan. So I'll turn that back over to you, Chair House. And if you've got any questions for me or Jim, we're happy to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer. Appreciate the update and congratulations to Sandy. Mr. Linthicum, would you like to add anything to this report?
No, can I just say one thing, wrapping up the Midcoast discussion. First off, the public speaker who sang the praises of John Haggerty, I couldn't agree more. I was so happy to hear someone say that as the corridor director for so many years on the project and just leading up that effort, just an incredible effort. The second thing is, it was a great celebration. Like Ray said, 8,500 people there. It's the biggest ground or ribbon cutting that I've ever attended, and I've attended dozens, as have many of you, and I appreciate the ITALC members that were also at the event. But what I found very interesting was afterwards. So not only was the community waiting for this, and they all showed up and they all loved it, and there was crushed loading on the trolley to get to the event. But afterwards, the people that always complain about everything, because there's a good part of society that likes to do that, but what their complaints are is like, well, yes, but it doesn't take me to the beach, and it doesn't do this, and it doesn't do that. What they're doing is they're clamoring for more of this. And I love it when I hear Mayor Gloria talk about progress is incremental. And this is the backbone now. So this is the backbone. And now it's much, much easier. And it doesn't cost $2.2 billion to now get shuttle buses to the beach through Pacific Beach or whatever. And people are talking about pedestrian bridge over I-5 to connect the community, desperately needed. So people are wanting more to take advantage of this. So I see a lot of the discussion about Midcoast, even though it has a negative connotation or a negative tone to it, as being very, very positive about the impact that this project will have to the region in the long term. So thank you.
Thank you for your efforts, for the Sandak team, for all the consultants that were involved, and everyone was there to celebrate because it really was cause for celebration. So well done
Thank you.
to everyone that was involved in that team. I don't see any public comments, clerk, if you could confirm. And now I can see hands for public members.
Yes, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, we do have a member comment, Pedro Orso. Mr. Orso, go ahead.
Um, Jim and Ray, congratulations on Midcoast. I had a chance to write to the event, and to my surprise, I bumped into John Haggerty and his family. And we chatted, and he gave me the best tour ever, and he kept telling me all of these different stories. When I arrived there at the event, I bumped into Chair House, but I was amazed at the amount of people and the atmosphere and everything. But I think the thing that highlighted it to me the most was that now that I know that it was 8,500 people that attended there, that's 8,500 people that I would imagine had never ridden the trolley before. And they are now aware of this wonderful system, and through word of mouth, that gets told, and eventually we will have more riderships. And I wish that we could do more of these events where we could invite the public to utilize the facilities that they have not been able to use. So on that note, on the regional transportation plan that you all are going to be voting, I attended the meeting last Friday where the leadership, the political leadership at Sandak requested that you took into account the federal funding coming into, and I do believe that it's a good move. I also understand that, and hopefully the rest of the board gets it this way. You cannot modify that right now because the way the plan and the environmental document are put together, it would not give you the time to get it approved before the end of the year, needing to be done to meet the requirements of the state that is imposing on Sandak. If you do not get this plan approved, you are at risk of losing some funding. And one of the things that I would hope that people also understand that yes, it's a visionary plan. Yes, it's a massive undertaking, but these are plans that can be modified, A, and B, there are plans that in 4 years, we will be having a different discussion 4 years from now. So hopefully nobody believes that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity and that's it. So I just wanted to get that statement on the record for this. And congratulations again on Midcoast. I mean, what a wonderful project.
Thank you.
That's all.
Very well. Are there any other comments by members? Mr. Halpern, go ahead.
Thanks. Wanted to echo everything that all the adulation about the Midcoast project. It was both a great event, and where I got on the trolley at Balboa, I tell people it was a little bit like those videos you see of the trains in Tokyo, where people are trying to jam themselves in. It was just the ridership was pretty amazing. And to echo, I think Pedro was saying, most of the people on my car were kind of like oohing and eyeing, and as if they I'm sure very few of them had actually ridden the trolley before. So it was really, really a great event. And also probably portends great things for transit whenever it is that we do get to free ridership. Because that was, there's, I guess, maybe a little bit of a mini experiment going on there too with the rides being free that day. But I did want to ask Ray one comment about the connected transportation system concept, and particularly with the shoulder uses by buses. To what extent will you also have interconnected the communication system with first responders and private ambulance services, things like that? Because it seems like that'll be an important part of the equation to, if you're going to be taking up shoulders with buses at times when, you know, there may also be an ambulance or whatever that needs to get someplace. Could you speak to that as to how connected the system actually will be?
Yeah, so Member Halpern, the point here would be to start with the buses themselves with the connected equipment and run the pilot to see how effective they are at traversing the shoulders and, of course, maintaining travel reliability on the route. We haven't identified a pilot component that would work with first responders, but that's certainly an opportunity. And it's something that, as we've developed our concepts for connected vehicle technology, first responders, of course, as well as the traffic management operators like Caltrans also would greatly benefit from this kind of connected technology. But the first part of this pilot is really going to focus on those vehicles. And there's a number of rules that CHP has applied to the use of the shoulders so that when they are being utilized by a disabled vehicle or some emergency vehicles, then of course the buses will need to stay in the travel lanes and not use the shoulders at all. So there's a protocol in place for the pilot, and there's quite a bit of evaluation on its effectiveness. But the equipment is not going to be dismantled at the conclusion of the pilot. So we envision being able to utilize the same connected equipment. And some of that's going to be installed on some of the signalized intersections in the corridor. And one of the things that we've actually started now is a separate grant-funded project that we just got the award. You might recall earlier this calendar year, we received about $10 million from Federal Highways for a whole connected vehicle application on the border. And so some of that is going to be actually supportive of South Bay Rapid. And there on some of the local streets, as well as the southern portion of State Route 905, we're going to be able to do some additional testing. So our hope is that with the durability of the equipment and the vision that we have to keep it in place for a while, that additional pilots can be conducted. First responders would be one of those that we would want to be doing.
Yeah, I would just make sure that that's, you know, sort of on the table and in people's minds, because as somebody who was in New York City at 9/11, the inability of emergency responders to communicate with one another really had tragic results. And, you know, so hopefully people are thinking about that as a core component of the connected transportation process. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Halpern. I see Mr. Orso, you have your hand up.
Yes, I forgot to make a comment on the buses on the shoulder. Ray, don't forget to thank the CHP. They get kind of fuzzy about it. And having had the pleasure of working with the CHP back in the mid 2000s when we did the low-tech buses on the shoulders, it was hard getting it without their support. So FYI.
Absolutely. No question the CH has played a vital role and will continue. They're going to be part of the evaluation team that looks at the effectiveness of this pilot. So thanks, Pedro.
Thank you. Well, I actually very much relate to this bus on shoulder project. I was on the original team that studied it. We actually went to Minneapolis and we saw buses on the shoulder in operation. We rode those buses and talked to the bus drivers and met with everyone. And so this is not something new, maybe new in California because of some concerns. That was like 15 years ago. So it's been a while, and it's interesting to see finally, hopefully, with technology for it to come to fruition. And the other thing is Midcoast, for people who may not understand how long it takes for these things to get done, some of you may recall Midcoast was on the original TransNet ordinance in 1987. That was when you all thought about it, or people prior to you thought about it, and it took 30 some years for that project to complete. That's why it's important to have the vision that you all have for the new program, the new regional plan. It's going to take a while to get there, but I'm very excited to be part of this process. So thank you very much, Sandak team. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda item, which is the consent calendar. We have 6 items on the calendar, and 2 of which will require an approval. But before we ask for approval, are there any comments? Mr. Orso, do you have your hand up for this particular one?
Yes, Chair House. I have a question on item number 5, and I also have a question on item number 6. So I don't know if you want to hold those and vote on the rest, or however you want to handle that.
So let's go. We'll vote on the full consent calendar, so we will hold those for discussion then. But if I could entertain a motion to, first of all, approve the meeting minutes from last meeting. Let's take care of that one first.
So move.
Okay, and Mr.
Second, and I would ask from a process standpoint, if you have a number of items on a consent agenda that need approval, do you do one approval or do you do them separately? I don't know, but
That's what I was wondering to Ariana. Maybe you can provide some direction there.
Yes, you can definitely take a vote on both items at the same time.
Okay, so then, Mr. Orso, would you like to amend your motion to approve both items number 3 and 4, the meeting calendar and meeting minutes? Okay. Do I have a second for that? For the motion.
happy still to second.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Halpern. Clerk, could you please take a vote?
Yes. Okay. Real estate right-of-way acquisition, Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Licensed civil traffic engineer, Michael Kinney.
Yes.
Contractor construction, Pedro Orso Delgado.
Yes.
Biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
Finance budgeting, Vice Chair Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Licensed engineer is absent. CEO private sector, Chair Sunny House.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much. So now let's move on to item number 5. I guess, first of all, I don't know if there are any public comments. I don't see any. No, I don't. Okay, Mr. Orso, you had a question about number 5?
Yes, on item number 5, I understand conceptually that you have received $24.9 million of CBI coordinated border infrastructure money from the federal government to replace local funds. My question is, what was the source of the local funds and what is happening to those local funds?
I'll try my best to answer that question. So the local funds, that term actually represents the fact that they are future local toll revenue bonds and other loans. As for what's happening to them with the swap, I'm not too sure about that. Maybe someone else from staff could answer that part of the question.
You don't need to. I believe in my pea brain that what's happening is that you will need less toll bonding capacity, which is a great thing for this project. So thank you.
Okay.
Very well. Now, you also had a question on item 6?
Yes, and this one always trips me. And here's my question. We're talking about fiscal year 2022, the first quarter. So we're actually talking about July to September of 2021.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Because I go,
Yes,
okay,
totally
we
understand.
haven't started 2022 yet.
Calendar year, no, but fiscal year, yes.
Okay, so I get that. It's hard sometimes for my head to get around those things. And then the other item that we're gonna have, that's a closure of the fiscal year 21, correct?
Which ended June 30th.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So this is just an extension of that. So I will wait for the other item to ask the specific questions because I'm assuming that the same things that are on this report should be on the other one, but for the whole year.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Urso. Okay, let's move on to item number 9, actions by the Transportation Committee and Board of Directors. And Ariana, would you like to give that report?
Happy to. Thank you, Chair House. Your last meeting was November 10th, and since then, the board approved the TransNet Smart Growth Incentive Program Call for Projects, which you reviewed at your last meeting. The board also heard the Regional Bike Early Action Program item that is on your agenda for today. And then the Transportation Committee, the city, the county, the Cities and County Transportation Advisory Committee, or CTAC, and the board were all presented with the same overview of the ordinance amendments that you also heard at your last meeting. As part of the board presentation, the board requested that staff identify funding availability by TransNet subprogram, which could then be used to inform its upcoming discussions on ordinance amendments, as Ray Trainer mentioned earlier. And then in response to this board request, staff presented the funding overview last Friday. That included an updated forecast for funding estimates originally included in the ordinance, as well as expenditures to date and remaining revenues by subprogram. And the board asked that we return to a future meeting with details about how each subprogram is funded. So we'll plan on doing that at the start of next calendar year. And that concludes my update. Thank you.
Okay, members of the public, if you have questions, you would raise your hand. I don't see any hands.
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Are there any comments by the members of the committee? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So let's move on to item number 10, which is the fiscal year 2022 ITALK goals status update. Julie?
Hi, good morning. So since your last meeting, the subcommittee to consider TransNet ordinance amendments has met to further discuss the FY21 triennial performance recommendations and the proposed amendments. Additionally, the group met to review legal counsel proposals and held interviews for the prospective firms. Additionally, the group met and I should say they anticipate to issue a notice to proceed this week. Once the agreement is in place, the subcommittee plans to meet with the legal counsel prior to the winter break and return to the ITALK with an update in January. So that concludes my update. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm here to answer.
Thank you, Julie. Are there any comments by the members of the public?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Thank you. And are there any comments by the members of the committee? I don't see any hands raised. All right. Are there any comments?
One quick question. How many firms submitted.
Right, so they're still currently under negotiations and I'm just not able to discuss that information yet, but we can update on the next update, which is in January.
Thank you.
Very well. Okay, we'll move on to item number 11, which is 2022 Performance Management Rule 1 Safety Target Setting. Mr. Sanford, welcome.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, ITALC members. Thank you for having me here today. And I'll also be co-presenting with my colleague, Tim Garrett, who will be helping cover some of the safety data later on in the presentation. So this is the fifth annual target setting process. So this is for calendar year 2022. This started with calendar year 2018 was the first iteration. And for the benefit of this group, the report is on page 52 of today's agenda. And then in the supporting materials starts on page 2. So we'll cover a little bit of the process and background since it is annual. You don't see it very frequently. Also, we'll go through what measures are included in this, incorporation with Caltrans, and then we'll look at some of the safety data for the San Diego region relative to the state to see how those comparisons are, and we'll follow up with a discussion on next steps. I do want to, briefly preface the presentation with a note really on the critical importance of safety planning and programming with this ultimate goal of driving down fatalities and serious injuries. And that's the ultimate goal. This presentation happens to be just focused on target setting process, but there is a larger role in safety that I can speak to a little bit more at the end of the presentation of efforts that are ongoing and anticipated in the future. So with that, next slide, please. So the process itself. The process is rolled into a rulemaking that came from Federal Highway Administration. It starts with the state DOT, Caltrans, establishing statewide target each year by the end of August. And for this round, for calendar year 2022, Caltrans took a trend-based approach. They looked at what the most recent trend is between observed years, and they forecasted that forward to come up with the target. So it is critical to note that in this context, target is not a desired state. It's what we anticipate to see on the roadways. It's not the common nomenclature we might use in other conversations. So SANDAG is required, and all MPOs are required to either set regional numeric targets or support the statewide targets and make that decision and communicate that to Caltrans by February 28th of each year. If we go next slide, please. So these are the required 5 performance measures that came from Federal Highway Administration. They are the number of fatalities and then the rate of fatalities by 100 million vehicle miles traveled. That helps normalize the data. Then the number of serious injuries and the rate of serious injuries, also by VMT. And then the last measure on here is a combined measure of fatalities and serious injuries for non-motorized roadway users. So that's going to include your cyclists, pedestrians, and other non-motorized users of the facilities. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the targets that were adopted by Caltrans back in August. On the left column, you see the same 5 performance measures that were just in the prior measure or prior slide. In the center column, these are the numeric targets that Caltrans has set for 2022. As required, they're set using a 5-year rolling average methodology. That's why you see some of the decimal points on there. In the furthest right column, you see the percent change from the preceding year. So with fatalities, the target is anticipated to go down by 3.6%. And then fatality rates also, since it's a function of how much driving is also occurring on the roadways, it's also a decrease, but not as much. However, you'll notice that with serious injuries, Caltrans anticipates that there's going to be an increase in serious injuries statewide in 2022. So again, target is not the desired end state. It is more what is anticipated based on trends and what is happening currently on the roadways. So on the next slides, what we're going to do, and I'm going to take these a little bit out of order. I'm going to, instead of going through the order of the table that was just presented, I'm going to start with the rate measures, and then I'll turn it over to Tim to handle some of the numeric measures and how we look at how our region is doing relative to the state. So I should give you a little bit of the rationale of how SANDAG staff has approached this. We look at how the San Diego region is doing for these 5 performance measures relative to statewide averages. And we see if SANDAG is doing as good or better than statewide averages, that leads us to believe that supporting the statewide targets is a good approach. And that's the staff's recommendation. However, if we are exceeding in any areas, then we need to take a different approach to help address that need. So looking at the current chart in front of us, this is fatality rate, so normalized by vehicle miles traveled. Everything that is in orange colors is related for San Diego region. Everything that is blue is for statewide numbers. So the bars represent annual numbers, and then the lines are the 5-year rolling averages. Then off to the right-hand side, you can see the targets. The targets starting in 2018 to 2021 have been adopted, and SANDAG adopted the statewide targets for those 4 years. And then you have that one square, pink square off to the right, which is today's topic, is that challenge of the 2022 target and the discussion of if SANDAG should support that statewide target or develop a regional numeric target. And you can kind of see some of the challenges that are with this process is that we still do not have data for 2020 or 2021. So we must infer what's occurring on our roadways, what has already occurred, but we don't have data to support to come up with that 2022 target. Looking at this chart, you can see that the SANDAG area, again in the orange colors, is well below statewide averages. And this is one of the few instances where we do want to be underrepresented in these particular performance measures. So the San Diego region is doing relatively well with the fatality rate by VMT. If we advance one slide and we look at the serious injury rate by VMT, again, everything for statewide is in blue. Everything that's in orange is for the San Diego region. You can see in the 2013-2014 timeframe, the San Diego region and statewide region were pretty close to each other. However, the San Diego region has been doing relatively well in 17, 18, and 19 compared to the statewide averages. And then you can see the targets off to the right. So these 2 performance measures kind of show how our region's doing compared to the state. And it's easy to compare the 2 because we have the data normalized by the amount of driving, the amount of exposure people have on the roadways. I'm now going to turn it over to Tim to talk about the other 3 measures.
Thank you, Sam. Next slide, please. So Sam kind of talked about the measures normalized by VMT. So now I'm going to talk about the fatalities and serious injuries in terms of absolute numbers. So the same kind of color scheme applies from before. Blue is statewide and the orange is San Diego County. So we can see that the 5-year average for statewide fatalities has been increasing for the last several years, especially due to higher numbers in 2016 and 2017, even though we've seen a little bit of a decline in 2018 and 2019 for annual changes. So Caltrans, in setting the 2022 proposed target, is assuming that the decline we've seen over the last 2 years will continue out for the next several years, and the 5-year average will be, as you can see, pretty consistent with what we've seen the last few years. And San Diego County, even though it's on the same scale on absolute terms as the state, it's a little bit hard to see, but the fatalities have been pretty consistent since about 2014. Next slide, please. So this different scale makes it a little bit easier to see how the county is doing relative to the state in terms of population. So there's a new line on this graph. It's the dotted one that represents San Diego County's population as a share of the state's population. So in 2019, it's about 8.44% of the state's population. So the orange line is the annual share of San Diego County's fatalities relative to the statewide fatalities, and then the blue is the statewide, or is the 5-year rolling average. So we can see that San Diego County is underrepresented in terms of fatalities occurring in the region relative to the state, based on what we'd expect to see from the population. It's about 7%, as you can see here. Next slide, please. And then for serious injuries, we can see the numbers have actually been increasing kind of significantly since a low in 2013, especially in the statewide scale. It's worth pointing out that there's a particularly large jump from 2017 to 2018, and that's based partially on a change in methodology and reporting. Previous to that, the only numbers that were included were what were defined as serious injuries only, but in 2018, there was a change to serious injuries as well as suspected serious injuries. So that partially explains the increase. There's a more modest increase of about 1.6% between 2018 and 2019 on an annual change. So Caltrans has forecast that more modest increase after the next several years to obtain a target for the 5-year rolling average in 2022 that you can see with the pink square. And San Diego County serious injuries had a peak in 2019, but a slight decrease, a peak in 2018 and a slight decrease in 2019. Next slide, please. So since the statewide serious injuries 5-year rolling average has been increasing, that's also true for San Diego County, but San Diego County's percentage of serious injuries relative to statewide is decreasing in terms of population. So the recent increases in serious injury statewide have been more steep than the increases in San Diego County. So that's why we can see that the more recent numbers are below that 8.44% population. It's now about 7.2%. Next slide, please. And then the final of the 5 required measures is non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So as Sam mentioned, this is a combined total that's supposed to reflect kind of an overall vulnerability for vulnerable road users. So this includes pedestrians, bicyclists, and people on personal conveyance. So that could include scooters, skateboards, wheelchairs, and other forms of personal mobility. And another point to make about this data is it refers to the person, if they were involved in a crash, refers to what they were doing at the time. So for example, if a person was outside of their vehicle changing a flat tire, they get hit by a car, they're considered as a pedestrian because they weren't in a vehicle at the time. So that's another thing to point out. So similar to the data shown previously with the fatalities and serious injuries, there have been decreases in fatalities, but increases in serious injuries. So the combined total is still an increase. And yeah, similar to the other ones, you can see that that forecast, the increase is still forecast out to 2022. Next slide, please. And then similar to what we've seen before, San Diego County is still a little bit better represented or underrepresented relative to the state, which is something that we prefer to see. So now it's about 7.5% of the statewide totals for the overall non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries measure. So now that we've gone through the recent data and an explanation for how the proposed targets for 2022 were developed, I'll turn it back over to Sam to go through some additional considerations.
Thank you, Tim. Next slide, please. So overview and impacts of what is required for PM1, this target setting process. So again, it's required for state DOTs and MPOs by Federal Highway Administration. The target achievement is really assessed at the state level. And we have, our Federal Highway Administration has been able to make an assessment for 2 years thus far, 2018 and 2019. And for those 2 years, California did not make significant progress as defined by Federal Highway Administration. As a result, Caltrans has had to make an additional plan for the primary funding source for safety capital projects, which is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP. So that plan essentially looks at how projects or how that programming, the finite amount of programming, is going to be prioritized to make as much advancement in safety as possible. The second bullet on there is the HSIP funding flexibility is removed. And what this refers to is between some federal sources, state DOTs can elect to flex some funds from one pot to another. This has not been a practice of Caltrans with HSIP funding anyways, so this was not an impact to our state. Now, targets that are set, whether SANDAG decides to support the statewide targets or develop regional numeric targets, those targets and our progress on them is included in each regional plan, such as the one that's going to the board this Friday. There is an appendix that documents our progress towards targets for safety and other federal required performance areas. In addition, the Regional Transportation Improvement Program is designed in a way such that it supports target achievement. So there's also a component of that program that documents how the projects that are listed in that program support target achievement. So this filters into other aspects of what SANDAG does as an MPO. As far as, we'll go to the next steps and then onto a brief discussion and hear any comments that we can glean from iTalk. As far as next steps, we have a few more. We have the TC to go to, Transportation Committee to go to for their feedback and guidance, and then ultimately the SANDAG board in January. And I should note that in the proposed final regional plan, one of the big components that I like to speak about as far as changes and implementation is there's a Vision Zero implementation action. That's a near-term action within that plan. And Vision Zero being focused on safety for all roadway users, really focusing on fatalities and serious injuries and driving those numbers down. The shape of what that implementation will take is to be determined, but is one of the actions that I'm excited to get us working on shortly after adoption. So if we can advance one slide, please. So this is a discussion item. And so we'd like to hear if there's any feedback from iTalk members on the option between SANDAG either supporting the Caltrans targets, which has been the choice for the last several years of this process, or developing and supporting regional targets. Now, at this time, staff's recommendation based on the data that Tim and I just reviewed is to continue to support Caltrans targets with the idea that with a Vision Zero implementation action coming on next year after the adoption of the plan, there may be more opportunity to reevaluate the 2023 calendar year targets for regional targets. But with that, I'll yield to Chair for any discussion.
Thank you very much. Clerk, I think we have some public comments.
Yes, Chair. We have Nicole Burgess.
Ms. Burgess, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you, iTalk board members and staff for the presentation. I am on a phone and it's kind of difficult to follow, but I am a huge safety advocate. I've been following Vision Zero with the city since I adopted it in the city. I'm very super grateful that SANDAG has adopted Vision Zero and safety is a huge criteria. And I hope it's implemented in some of these bikeway projects criteria. I'm not going to be able to speak on that agenda item. I have a commitment. But I sit on the City of San Diego Mobility Board and aligning safety. And I just would like to put out my shout out for Caltrans has some targets to me. I want to see the numbers. So like I was trying to look at my phone and say, okay, is that 250 approximately 200 not motorized fatalities and then almost 250 non-motorized? So are we looking at like 500 fatalities? I didn't see any hard numbers. So if staff would like to have the conversation with me, I'd love to see some hard data on what's really happening in the county, and even if it can be broken down into the city. we definitely should be shooting for what those hard numbers are and looking to decrease those numbers by 10%. So in my opinion, like set these regional targets and let's meet Vision Zero in the next 10 years and reduce those fatalities. We know how to do it with better street design. And as I next go conquer market and commuting by bike, safety to me is just one of the biggest things. And a safety PR campaign aligning with Sandbag and the city is also greatly important. Appreciate the time. I know I'm over my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burgess. And I
And
see Ms.
we also have Dr. Bailish.
Okay, Mr. Bailish, Dr. Bailish, go ahead. Dr. Bailish, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Am I on now, ma'am?
Yes, go ahead.
Very good. Finally, yes. Thank you once again. Do the stats include breakdowns? I know the numbers are not terribly high and the distinctions may not be useful, but for the time of day, particularly nighttime, and whether the bikers versus not, to echo the comments of Nicole Burgess, a rural city, whether they're intersections, the age groups, and from my perspective, whether pedestrian visibility is a factor. And I mentioned before the idea of these linear LED jackets for nighttime riders. I think just incredible. If visibility is a problem, wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any members of ITALK who have any comments or questions? Mr. Halpern, go ahead.
Thanks. I don't want to be unfair, but it sort of sounded like, Sam, in your presentation, you said that to the extent that San Diego's, that our region's results compare favorably to the state targets, will endorse the state targets. But if our numbers didn't look as good, then we would reassess. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that. And then my second question would be, to the extent that our results do compare favorably, are there any hypotheses as to why frankly, it's a little bit hard to believe that it's just because we're better drivers or because we have consistent luck. So I'm curious if there's any thoughts as to why what the disparity might be. Thanks.
Thank you. Both good questions. On the comparison piece, essentially what we are looking at to see if we're overrepresented in one area, then we want to try and tackle that area. And this is consistent with how there's essentially a statewide planning document, the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, that looks at safety data statewide and looks at challenge areas. Where are there different characteristics of crashes or contributing factors to crashes that are overrepresented in the statistics? And then looking at those geographically as well. And when those are identified, then more resources are brought to bear to try and address those. We've taken kind of a similar approach with these 5 measures to say, are we overrepresented as a region relative to the state in any of these 5 measures? And if so, what can we do to change that? That's the logic that we had on this approach. That addresses part 1. Part 2, I'm sorry.
If I could just ask, so I get the overrepresented, but are there instances actually where we're sort of underrepresented, and so that there's a mirror image of the overrepresented issue? Do you know what I mean? Am I missing something in even asking the question that way?
I haven't seen an instance where we see it in either direction, under and over. So I'm not sure if I understood that part correctly. I guess one idea would be when we generally see in safety, when we see a facility or a corridor that's underrepresented in certain crash types or contributing factors, then we want to investigate, okay, why is that one behaving, or why are the statistics showing that one is doing better? There might be something that is different. And like you said, repeated luck isn't going to be the answer. There's something else there. To the question of why is the San Diego region different than the state and has been so in several of the years that have been in this analysis, I don't have a great answer for that one as to why that is. If it's more on more differences in other jurisdictions, it's a good question. One that really bears more analysis. I'd love to dive into more. And I know we do have a subcommittee on safety with ITALC. That could be something that we can continue to look into.
But it is the case, and Dr. Baelish, I think, referred to this. You do look at the sort of what seem to be the contributing factors to the fatalities and serious injuries, and try to assess whether, you know, San Diego doesn't have those particular factors as prevalent as may other areas of the state. Just, you know, hypothetically, if 90% of fatalities happen in open roads, non-freeway, and San Diego's percentage of total vehicle miles traveled is low relative to the rest of the state, that would be one reason why we would, why our numbers would be lower than the states. But you're saying you actually do look at those contributing factors, and there's nothing that actually jumps out as differentiating San Diego relative to the average region in the state. Is that correct?
That is correct. If we look at other, I should say, with these particular 5 measures, there's nothing particular about them. When we dive into those contributing factors, which these measures are fairly blind to, they're incorporated in, but it's not that deep of an analysis. But looking at that contributing factors, then we start seeing, okay, they're aggressive driving, under the influence, excessive speed. Those are contributing factors that where San Diego is overrepresented relative to the state, resulting in fatalities and serious injuries. And then also on the crash types, lane departure is another one where our region struggles relative to the state. So there are those pieces. That's more a function of the strategic statewide highway safety plan. That's where they identify those, and we work with Caltrans staff on those pieces.
Mr. Orso.
Couple of questions. Sam, the state strategic highway plan, I'm assuming that it does include local streets, arterials, and it drills down. It's more than just the state infrastructure.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, what would be the benefit of SANDAG establishing its own metrics if you are already analyzing the departures and looking at it? I mean, I'm failing to see the benefit.
The benefit of the San Diego region developing their own measures?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I think if the region develops a program to support safety, then we would need some kind of guidance as to where that program should invest its resources. And that could be the purpose of those targets. As it stands right now, supporting the state with both our planning efforts and our programming efforts is advancing the state and San Diego region together. Moving forward with the Vision Zero implementation with the regional plan, I think there is opportunities there to continue to develop this even further. And at that point, it might be more worthwhile to have those guides as to where to put those resources, whatever resources can be brought to bear.
Okay, thank you.
So that's my, I guess, dilemma or question. You have Vision Zero, which is very aggressive program to make sure we eliminate all the safety hazards issues. The state program expects injuries and fatalities as part of what it is. So they have maybe a lower safety standard or a higher expectation. So the two don't really match. That to me is like apples and oranges. If we decide to embrace Vision Zero, seems to me that that's a much more aggressive program as far as improving safety than if we just stay with the statewide program. Are there other jurisdictions that have their own regional program that's a little bit more aggressive than the state?
Yes, and to clarify, the Caltrans has a towards zero deaths policy in their strategic, I cannot get the acronym correct today, statewide highway safety plan by 2050 is their goal. Okay, so that Vision Zero being perceived as a much more aggressive approach, I think is consistent. For our region, I think there's hope in developing a regional data approach where we can have data accessibility for staff and others to use to inform decisions. Other MPOs, such as similar to SANDAG, have robust safety programs within California, and then also MPOs, many other MPOs in other states. The Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG for the LA area, has a large program, including what they call Go Human, which is focused on smaller education, some capital projects for active transportation to make facilities more appropriate for all roadway users. MTC has or Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area has a robust safety program as well. Those are two of the MPOs that, in our state, that we often look at as peer agencies to see how they're doing, and they have programs up and running in the safety area.
So Sam, what does it take for SANDAG to develop and adopt its own program versus Caltrans, accepting Caltrans or California's?
I think some of the first steps are some of the guidance that we received from the ITALC subcommittee on safety. First is we're collecting local roadway safety plans. So to get a better understanding of what local jurisdictions already have. Is there already a prevalence of safety data and analysis in our region that we can leverage or lean on? If not, maybe there is more capacity for a regional approach or a regional plan, but we don't want to be redundant in that effort. And so that research is ongoing, and we look forward to sharing that information with the ITALC subcommittee on safety in early spring, late summer. We'll be working with Ariana and Julie to set that up. That's kind of the first step to see where we're at. And then as some of the triennial, I guess it was the 2021 triennial audit recommendation was for SANDAG to have a safety coordinator. So that's another outreach we are performing with peer agencies, other MPOs, to see what their safety structure looks like. You know, how many full-time equivalent staff are focused on safety, and what are their roles and responsibilities, and how does that work within their reporting structure. That's another piece that we can report to the ITALC subcommittee on safety, and then also the ITALC as a whole.
Okay. I see Mr. Frankel's hand up. I'll get to you in a minute, Jonathan. But I guess the question is, if and I want the committee members to weigh in on this, because they came to us with a question, you know, the recommendation. Are we in agreement with that recommendation or not? So it sounds like you're doing what you're kind of starting to put together more data and information towards maybe a more aggressive regional program or a more robust regional program. But at this time, the information is not in place for this year's adoption of the safety program. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's one way to express it.
Okay, and you have to have an adoption of the program by a certain date?
Yeah, for the targets themselves, we need to communicate that to Caltrans by February 28th.
Very well, okay. Mr. Frankel and then Mr. Kenny.
Thank you very much, Chair House, and thank you for your presentation. To Sunny's point, it seems like there's a bit of a misalignment here between the state target and our Vision Zero objectives. And so what I'm wondering is, for example, the state target is, for example, 4,600 or so non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. If Sandag set that number, if we had a regional target of say 3,000 or 2,500 or less, would Sandag then be incentivized financially via the Federal Highway Administration or some other source of funding to make infrastructure improvements consistent with the target? Meaning, do we now align our incentives better with a more robust regional safety target, more aligned with Vision Zero, such that now we're actually financially incentivized to make improvements consistent with Vision Zero?
I like the way you put that together. And yes, so the way we currently go through project selection with the regional plan is we go through and we look at safety kind of network wide. And as projects are developed for a regional plan, how safety can be benefited through the advancement of those projects. So that is taken from step one. Safety is brought in with projects that come from the regional plan. And then as projects advance through the planning phase, into the programming phase, into the TIP, it's obviously carrying forward that safety aspect of it. So one of the challenges, and I think Chair House spoke to this, is the long development process of projects. So we have projects that are in the current program that were in the, multiple plans ago, are still going through the pipe of going through development. So that is a slow process. So a change today might not result in a change of a project tomorrow. It will be a long time frame. But I do want to speak to your earlier point also about that disconnect or potential disconnect between targets. And one aspect that Caltrans is highlighting with some of the targets that they've adopted is that continuing our current programming for safety projects, our current programs for safety education, enhancement, enforcement, that is what has brought us to today's trends, what we're seeing today. Continuing those same processes is likely going to result in the same results or similar results. Okay, so other changes, other opportunities need to be evaluated and looked at. So I understand that there's this reticence on having targets of increasing serious injuries, and other state DOTs have gone through this and they've had a lot of discussion about how to address it. On the one side, people want to see targets where we are getting to where we want to go. However, it also needs to be informed by the data and what is happening on the roadways. So there's the opportunity to also communicate this to the public and saying, public, this is, we anticipate seeing more of this type of crash on our roadways. We need your help as well. Roads engineering can take us so far, but the majority of crashes involve some sort of human behavior. We are human, we do make mistakes, and there's a lot of efforts underway to try and figure out how to dissipate energies from crashes and somehow lessen the opportunities for human mistakes, but we are human in the end. So we can also look at these targets as a challenge for us to rise to. So I think there is an opportunity there as well, but I'm hoping I answered your question.
You did, yeah. Thank you, Sam. And I think given that, I think your point is a good one, that if we have an opportunity to perhaps deviate or do something different that we haven't been doing with respect to state standards, we've adopted in the past several cycles, as you mentioned, the state standard, and perhaps maybe not this year. The timing doesn't appear to align, but moving forward, I would look forward to trying to figure out how we could adopt a regional standard that really is more aligned with our objectives in Vision Zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel. Mr. Kenny, go ahead.
Good morning. Sam, you had mentioned at one point that you thought waiting a year until after the regional plan got approved would be a good time frame for making the decisions about how to move forward. Can you go over that again?
Yeah, so the idea here is, as was mentioned, some other MPOs have safety programs in them where they are funding either small capital projects, and we do have an engineering firm with our engineering division within Sandag that is obviously building projects, making tremendous safety improvements. There's what we see in other MPOs is they also have programs that are working with NGOs, with communities, with education campaigns as well, public relations campaigns as for safety as well. Setting up a program like that is one of the many possibilities for what the Vision Zero implementation action is in the regional plan. So the exact shape of what that's going to be is still to be determined. But if it were to go along something along those paths of being similar to what we see in some of the other MPOs, that's going to take some time to stand up and get running. Once it's up and running, then we would hope to see some changes in some of the statistics. We wouldn't be able to see those in this particular target setting effort for an additional 2 years, since there is a delay in the release of data. So it is a little bit of a hurry up, because we want to make the impact as quick as possible, but then we have to have a lot of patience in order to see the results of that.
Second question is, if the state and all of the other players fail to meet the federal requirements, the downside is that the HSIP funds are going to be more restrictive. Is that true?
They're focused on safety.
We're not going to lose them. They're just going to eliminate some of the categories that we can currently use HSIP funds for.
Yeah, so with funds, federal funds that go to state DOTs, HSIP is one of them. There's also the National Highway Performance Program. States have the possibility to flex funds from one pot to another, from HSIP to this NHPP or vice versa, up to a certain amount. When a state DOT does not make significant progress, then essentially Federal Highways says, no, you can't flex your HSIP to anything else. It needs to be focused on safety, which is a welcome, in my mind. It's not an effect on Caltrans, since Caltrans has not elected to flex those funds away from that pot. Okay,
so we spend most of our HSIP money on safety improvement projects anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. At the beginning of this program, there was some concern from agencies that the state guidelines would be too high, if I remember. And some of those agencies were considering setting up their own programs, not necessarily because they go in a different direction. They were just concerned that if the state had set up some thresholds that they couldn't meet, that they would suffer in some way. And it doesn't look, the states set thresholds that they're struggling to meet, but has that led to any other agencies bailing on their program, or most other MPOs sticking with the state's program?
A few have charted their own paths. Fresno Council of Governments did. I believe MTC has in recent iterations as well. And getting to a little bit of background for the benefit of the rest of the group, in the early rounds of target setting in 2018, 2019, Caltrans was taking a much more aspirational approach to what the number of fatalities and serious injuries were going to be on our public roads. Essentially, they looked at the current year and trying to get to zero by 2050 and just extrapolated out linear. What do we need to reduce by every year in order to get to zero by 2050? Which was a calculated approach, which is fine. They since received additional guidance from Federal Highways recommending that they do more of an evidence-based approach. So those first couple of years were pretty, I guess, aspirational as far as what the targets were and how they were set. Since then, the change has been towards more of a trend-based approach.
Well, thank you for that. All things being equal, I'd always like to see San Diego a little bit below the state average in accidents, because we enjoy better weather than Northern California, and that can be a big contributor to accidents. And a lot of our infrastructure is just newer relative to other urban areas, San Francisco and LA, that have a lot of much infrastructure. So we should always be slightly below what the average is for those reasons. And it looks from your data like we're marginally beneath the state average, but we should be there. So So just to add that, I think in response to Stuart's questions about why San Diego is where it's at, and we've always kind of been right below the state for that reason. All right, so if I understand what you're saying, the 2-year mark might be a good opportunity to review all these things. We'll have a program in place and better data.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. We have Mr. Halpern and then Mr. Orso. I would like to move this along because we have other agenda items. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mr. Halpern.
Thanks. I just have just one quick point. You know, listening to the discussion here today, I appreciate, Sam, how it very upfront you gave the context for the use of the term target and how it differs from the colloquial sense of the word. And I imagine that that's a word that is comes from the federal federal government, and that we don't necessarily have much choice in using that word. But to the extent that, you know, this is a body that represents taxpayers and citizens, for sake of clarity, if you could sort of pass along up the chain, that it would actually be quite helpful if they could just change that term to estimate or projection or something, so that we can actually have a clear, separate conversation about, as you characterize, what's aspirational as opposed to what literally is just a forecasted number. I think that would just help make it a little bit more clear for the public. Thanks.
Good point. Mr. Orso.
I just have a quick statement. I would support staying the course and looking at the Vision Zero and then making an assessment 2 years from now.
Okay, very well. This item did not require a vote, but since they came to us for our, I guess, our opinion, and Mr. Orso has eloquently stated that opinion, let's go ahead and see if others agree with that. Would you like to make that a motion, basically, Mr. Orso, to recommend moving forward?
If that's allowed, yes, I would.
Okay, is there a second for that?
I'll second the motion.
So the motion is to move forward with adopting the state standards at this point for this round of cycle. Did I understand that correctly? Mr. Orso?
Yes.
Very well. Okay, Clerk, could you please take a vote?
Real estate, excuse me, real estate right-of-way acquisition, Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Licensed civil traffic engineer, Michael Kinney.
Yes.
Contractor construction, Pedro Orso Delgado.
Yes.
Biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
Finance budgeting, Vice Chair Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Yes.
CEO private sector, Chair Sunny House.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Thank you very much. But from the discussions I hear, I think there is a desire for Sandak to move towards a more regional plan eventually, especially because of Vision Zero adoption. And you know, I think we are capable of doing better than the statewide standards, and we should move towards that, not only for the safety of public, but also for the fact that you could attract more federal matches and encourage more federal dollars coming to the region. So that would be my take from all of this. So thank you, Sam. Thank you, Tim, for your information and presentation. Appreciate it. We're going to move on now to item number 12, which is TransNet Regional Bike Early Action Program. And Mr. Kluth, are you with us?
Yes, I am here. Can you see and hear me?
Absolutely. Yes. Go ahead, please.
Great. Thank you, Chair House. Good morning. So we're bringing this item to you this morning in response to the request that our Board of Directors Vice Chair Gloria made back in September, asking how Sandag can deliver our bike projects faster and more efficiently with respect to cost. So in today's presentation, I'm going to break down the proposed strategies or ideas into three main categories of the project development process: planning and community outreach, environmental review and approvals, and then finally project design and construction. So first off is planning and community outreach. This was a big one, and one of the main focus of the letter that we got from the advocacy community also back in September, asking us to go faster and not have protracted community outreach. So San Diego agrees that the first set of our EAP projects took much too long in taking community input and trying to reach sometimes a near unanimous consensus, which, as we know, is not realistic. So in reality, we ended up going quite a ways past the point of diminishing returns on our community input. The later projects, however, though, like Imperial Avenue Bikeway, were much more focused and had much shorter outreach timelines. So we have learned along the way, but still moving forward, we will be more proactive and be more clear about setting realistic expectations about the projects, what the projects are, what kind of improvements can be considered within the goals and the funding guidelines of the bike program. And lastly, be really clear with the community and upfront about the process, what the process for outreach will be, and what that timeline will be once we know what the project is. So at the same time, we need to be very cognizant of the unique needs and characteristics that every community has. And lastly, we still have to recognize the importance of building alliances in the community along the way. One alternative strategy, or one strategy that we could use depending on the setting, is intensive multi-day planning and design charrettes. It's probably as much or more work for staff and our consultant teams, but that's one way we could potentially shorten the overall outreach timeline. And then second, onto environmental reviews and approvals. So with CEQA, we've done pretty well time-wise, given the CEQA process has a number of very useful exemptions for active transportation projects that we've been able to exercise. So when we have federal funds on a project, however, there's more and more of those projects in that category where we need to go out and get grant funding. We need to go through the NEPA process. And so NEPA is a bit more tricky and time intensive, as it has no significant exemptions or streamlining for active transportation projects. So to potentially to help address that moving forward in the future, we are working with our legislative affairs team here at Sandag, and I've also had a chance to speak with Caltrans headquarters and the folks administering the active transportation program about working with the feds to consider streamlining for active transportation projects in NEQA, similar to CEQA. And the people administrating the ATP program said they had actually heard that from a couple of the other large MPOs as well. So we'll be continuing those conversations with our partners at the state, and then also our legislative affairs. But for the time being, we'll stick with the standard timelines spelled out for the NEQA and CEQA process during the public input phase. Okay, and then third category, the project design and construction. So the big one here really is kind of refocus our efforts and do early coordination and collaboration with the jurisdictions, utilities, and railroads. To that end, we do have a new partnering agreement in development with SDG&E. So hopefully that will bear fruit and getting our projects done with more certainty and a little quicker. So another thing is to expedite. We're going to be reaching out to try and get greater agreement with reviewing agencies and staff. And we'll be working with our partner agencies to, if they haven't already, support the adoption of the National Association of City and Transportation Officials guidelines, more commonly known as NACTO, for bikeway design, bikeway and pedestrian design. So to really support those standards. And also we'll be working with agencies to adopt pedestrian and design standards that are consistent with the intent of the Federal Highways Design Flexibility Memorandum that was in attachment 1 there. Essentially, giving local engineers more, well, as it says in the memo, more flexibility in the design based on best practices and other projects around the country that have shown good results. So those are all the main issues that primarily affect time. But as we know, and we've discussed many times with the ITOC, project cost is also a big concern. So there's a couple things there that we want to address with our partner agencies moving forward. One of them is this idea of how betterments are included in the bikeway projects. And essentially what we mean by that are a lot of our projects are in older parts of town where we've had some aging infrastructure, old light standards, old signals. And so, some of those things are part of the project cost and part of the design that we need to incorporate. But we do run into instances where sometimes maybe things that are tangentially associated with or less are asked to be part of the project. And we're happy to coordinate with our partner agencies as much as possible, but we do need to look for a more equitable cost sharing strategy. It's much better to get in and get out one time if we can do that, if at all possible. So I think that's pretty critical to our strategies moving forward. And then last, I just want to touch on kind of a relatively new strategy that's becoming more and more popular. That's called the quick build strategy. And we think that offers great opportunity in claiming space for projects, and particularly if you have an area where that there are issues, identified safety issues, you can go in and you can do a lot with paint and bollards to create a safer, more separated facility. But we need to also bear in mind that there are some instances where that's a step along the way to the ultimate solution. And that if it's on a higher speed roadway, for example, you really need more physical separation, more vertical hard barriers to create actual safety. So we want to work here and with our partner agencies to see how we can most effectively incorporate that into the project development process, and make sure that when we're doing that it fits in the whole context of the project and what's really needed to improve safety in the long term. So that is my presentation and summary of our proposals, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cluth. Clerk, are there any public comments?
In Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, Mr. Orso, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation, Chris. One of the things that I have always been a firm believer when working on projects is, regardless of the funding source, I always try to make it a priority to follow the NEPA process. And I will always do an NEPA CEQA document, regardless if I know that I'm going to have, because that offers me more flexibility. So, you know, if you're only doing a CEQA document and you're running short or you need grants, then you have to backpedal and create a NEPA document. So take that into account. As far as the outreach, I mean, you get into a situation where you need to listen to the community. You need to get their feedback in doing the charrettes that you mentioned. It's a great investment of upfront time where they become your allies when you want to step away from what's presented in those charrettes. You will never have 100% engagement. And one of the things that I learned really well from my brothers and sisters at Caltrans is that you have to go into what I call turtle mode at some point in time and say, okay, we have listened, we have done everything. I am burying my head and my feet in, and I am doing what I need to do. And that's the end of it. And you know, which creates controversy. As far as the agreement with agencies up front, that's always needed, but make sure that your project team has all of these agencies participating in charrettes and planning documents and everything, which sometimes they don't like to do because they like to see themselves as regulators and not as part of the team. But the quicker you make them part of the team, the better off you're going to be. And try to avoid that Christmas tree approach from the other agencies where, you know, they keep wanting more, but they're not willing to pay. Make it clear what you can and can't pay. And, you know, I think you have more success that way. But I applaud your efforts, and I have always believed that, and this sounds counterintuitive, but a project as large as Midcoast sometimes is a lot easier to do than a project as small as a simple bike lane is. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Orso. Mr. Linthicum, would you like to respond?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. First off, to pick up on what Pedro just said, yeah, there's certain things that a job the size of Midcoast gets you. Although it's a big, huge monster of a project, it got us in the front door to see people when we need to see people. And bike jobs don't always do that. But with the city of San Diego now, with Mayor Gloria, we have a seat at the table. There's one thing I really want to key on what Chris said, and that is about when we go in and we touch, let's say, an intersection in a city, regardless of what city it is. Well, the city folks, everybody's always short of money. They say, well, now we should upgrade this and upgrade that and solve all these problems, right? And if you want a permit, this is what you got to do. And so it's not a really efficient give and take between two public agencies. The success of Midcoast and the success of I-15 and North Coast Corridor are the partnerships. And one of the questions, if you have a good partnership you have going, is the questions you ask your teammate, especially in the beginning, is, if you were doing this job yourself in-house, would you make this upgrade? Or are you only doing this because, quote, somebody else is paying for it? And when you can get past that argument and say, look, yeah, we wouldn't normally make this upgrade, versus, let's say it's a wheelchair ramp where, yeah, oh my goodness, yes, you absolutely have to. If you're going to touch that, you have to bring it up to standard. There's certain things you have to do, and we get that, and we all agree on things like that. But there's certain things where you're just sort of fixing the infrastructure, the bigger problems, which, like Chris said, drives up the cost. If you can get to the point with that, a team, where the public agencies are all seeing this as tax dollars and not mine and yours, which just ends up driving up the cost to the taxpayer. If you can do that, then you're going to have a great success. And I think we're getting there with the city of San Diego because of all the other stuff we're doing and the input from the mayor's office with the city streamlining, things like that. You've heard me talk over the years about the standards. Part of the problem the city of San Diego had is we're putting things out there that if you drive around the city or bike around the city of San Diego, now you see things you haven't seen before. And so as traffic engineers and people concerned about liability, they have to make sure that they vetted these things, or else they're going to lose their shirt. And so the fact that there are now standards, they're being rolled out nationally, that makes traffic engineers and attorneys way more comfortable approving some of these things. And last thing, as far as streamlining goes and speeding things up, we are just as impatient as can be, and we like to speed things up as fast as we can. And if you drive around downtown, you probably notice like 4th and 5th, the bike lanes on 4th and 5th. They seem like they've been under construction for our entire lifetimes. Well, they have not, but it just seems that way. These are complex jobs. These jobs, that particular project, because of the speed of the traffic, has traffic signals just for the bikes. That is for those of you who work in traffic, and I know some of you do, you know that those are complex things to get approved and turn on, because you're mixing high-speed traffic in a very, very dense part of town with a bicycle community, especially going down 4th and up 5th during rush hour. There's just a lot of potential conflicts between bikes and cars. You need to just figure that out. And whenever a city or Caltrans turns on a traffic signal, they plan for it, they watch it, they tweak it. These are complex operations. And so 4th and 5th, if you see it and you're wondering why the heck is that taking so long, that's the reason why. But we're getting closer because we're starting to turn on traffic signals now, right?
Yes, we are, starting yesterday.
Yep. And so we're getting there. But I just see this, especially under the work that Chris is doing, and Sharon Humphreys, who's our new Director of Engineering and Construction, working with the City of San Diego and the Gloria administration is just, you're gonna see a lot of changes in the bike and active transportation program. So sorry for being so wordy, but thank you, Chair.
Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Linthicum. You actually hit, and both Chris and you hit on something that I was going to bring up. You've used the word partner a lot throughout this whole presentation. Have you all considered a more formal partnering process? I know it's done mostly in construction, but it is effective, and in most cases, some of these agencies are the same. So just creating maybe a project basis or a program-wide partnering program throughout the delivery might be helpful. Have you considered that?
Let me speak first, Chris. I'm very familiar with partnering on the construction program. We've done it a couple of times outside of construction, and you're right. And that is an excellent idea, especially since we seem to be on the same page now with a lot of these folks.
Yeah, but formalizing the process helps.
Absolutely.
Go to the table in agreement in advance, or if there are disputes, it's a good process to continue on for this program. So
I agree 100%, and let us start talking about that. That is an excellent idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item number 13, which is now the Bikeway Program Project Status Report. And Ms. Gonzalez, would you like to provide a presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair House. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to share the report. Okay. So I'm here today to present to you our 2021 TransNet project status reports. So just a little bit of background for you all. The FY 2015 TransNet Triennial Performance Audit provided recommendations to better enhance our project management practices and improving our performance monitoring and reporting for our major corridors as well as the regional bikeway program. So in response to these audit recommendations, staff developed the annual TransNet project status reports in fiscal year 2017. So these reports monitor annual performance metrics such as projects delivered on schedule,
projects delivered on budget, contract award value against engineer's estimate, and bikeway miles constructed. So today we will be reviewing the key data points for the FY 2021 reports. And so the data in these reports is as of the end of FY 21, so June 30th of this year. And I'd also like to acknowledge that for next year's reports covering fiscal year 2022, we will be considering whether the metrics should be updated based on actions being taken to expedite project delivery of the bike EAP as Chris just presented. And as we continue to implement recommendations from the 2021 triennial performance audit. So consider this kind of a continuation of our existing format, but we are looking at ways that maybe we need to reconsider some of these items in the future. So we'll go ahead and begin with the major corridors report. So the first metric that we show in this report is our leverage program funding. So this shows you kind of the breakdown of what we are bringing to the table with TransNet funds and how we are leveraging outside sources. Through the FY 2021 period, TransNet represented 29% of the overall program funding. Meaning that we were able to leverage 71% of our funds from outside federal, state, and local sources. So a slight increase from last year where we were at about 70%. The ordinance requires a 50% match or leveraging for outside sources. So we've continued to exceed that goal over the last several years, being at 70+%. The second metric that we show in this report is our schedule milestone attainment. So in this, we focus on the key, two of the key milestones that we monitor. So projects advertised as well as projects open to the public. So for our projects advertised, we had one planned advertisement for the Major Corridors program, which was the Siempre Viva interchange construction. So we accomplished that as planned. And then on the projects open to public side, we had 3 planned openings. We met 2 out of the 3 milestones. The only one that we missed was the Bus on Shoulders demonstration project. However, as was reported in the executive director's report, we're really close to being in operations for that project. So that milestone will be met over the next couple of months. And kind of the cause for delay for postponing that into FY 2022 was delayed pole delivery, and delayed project demonstration as a result of COVID-19 conditions. So we'll be close to being able to mark that one as complete. And moving on to the next page, we also monitor the support to capital ratios of our projects, kind of grouped by a few different categories. So we have broken up the project support to capital ratios by project budget. So those projects less than $30 million, those projects $30 to $100 million, and then those 100 million plus. So as you can see for those projects, 100 million plus, staying pretty consistent over the last few fiscal years. For those less than 30 million, a slight decrease to 48%. And then for those 30 to 100 million, a slight increase to 55%. So overall, pretty consistent with past trends that we've seen for the support to capital ratios. And then moving down, the next item that we have summarized are comparison of our construction contracts awarded in comparison to our engineers' estimates. So there were 2 contracts that were awarded in fiscal year 2021, both on the goods movement program. So it was our SR 125-905 southbound to westbound connector, and then the Siempre Viva interchange project. Looking at both of those contracts, we came in 18% lower than the engineer's estimates, which is good news. The funds on those projects were state funds, so SB1 TCEP and TCIF. But great news that they came in lower than the planned budget. And those were the only 2 that were awarded for this fiscal year. And then the last couple metrics are our total budget variance first. So this being a comparison of what was our pre-construction project budget, and then what were the total project costs at completion. So kind of seeing how did we spend, were there significant cost increases, cost savings. So looking at, we closed out 6 projects this past fiscal year. And comparing the total budget at completion, we were 2% lower than the project budget pre-construction, which is great news. A little bit of savings there, but coming in really closely with what we planned the project budgets to be. And then looking at the construction budget variance, so this focuses on just the construction budget item. So not considering all phases, but just construction capital and construction support. So for those same 6 projects, we came in 1% higher. So again, very close margins, very close to the budget at the pre-construction stage. So I'll go ahead and pause right there in case there are questions. Again, this kind of summarizes the major corridors projects, but I'll pause before I transition to the bike program.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Are there any public comments regarding this particular?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, Mr. Orso, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
A question, and I know you don't have it, it's not here, but one of the things that you might want to consider is a metric that talks about project closeout, and whether or not the project has been closed out. I found out while working at Caltrans, and Jim is very well aware of that sometimes it was taking us several years, even to the extent of 5 years, to close out the project. And there were funds that were remaining on those projects that couldn't get disencumbered and put back into the kitty. So, just a thought.
Absolutely. Yes, we've definitely, especially this fiscal year, looking at a lot of those older projects that are on the books and how can we effectively close those out. So we can definitely consider that moving forward and how to report that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question, Chelsea, about the difference in the budget variance between 21 and 20. Can you explain why it was such a significant cost savings in that year?
Yes, absolutely. So last fiscal year, the 2 projects or the 3 projects that we closed out, there was a significant variance on those. Those were, it was an project on the 15 and then a couple goods movement projects. So the main reason that FY20 saw such a large variance is because that was due to project scope changes and funds being kind of shifted around between the corridor. So a couple of those kind of older projects where we might have combined the scope into one at the beginning of the project pre-construction got separated out into separate CIPs and moved within the corridor. So that was kind of the reason for such that big variance in FY20 for those few projects that closed out. It wasn't necessarily a huge savings, but kind of a reprioritization and trying to deliver the projects as efficiently as possible.
Okay, so those projects are still in the book to be delivered at a later date or something like that?
Yes, or they've already been kind of in the process of closing out themselves. But yes, those were kind of moved within the corridor and also still delivered, but not a loss of scope within the program.
Okay. That kind of skews the data when you combine them together. I don't know if there is a way to separate that, because I know it's program-wide you're looking at, but if we're interested in knowing how you actually deliver projects, whether they're within budget or lower or higher, use that reporting process. So you may want to consider a different, at least have some explanations or information available in that case. So it doesn't look like you had that in 2021.
No, in 2021, the projects we closed out were much more straightforward in terms of kind of same scope carrying out pre-construction versus the end. And so, yeah, we try to include the little star underneath, but I'll definitely consider how in the future, if we experience the same thing, if we can kind of explain that a little bit better so it doesn't stand out as much.
Well, the star doesn't tell me if there was an actual cost savings or increase because all combined together. That's where, what's the actual savings or overage? That would be my interest. So, okay, very well. Let's go ahead and move on to the bike program.
Okay. So moving on to the bike program. So this contains a lot of the same metrics as the major corridors report, with the exception of some of this data on page 1, just due to the kind of unique delivery and the mileage metrics for the bike program. So in these first two graphs, you'll see a breakout of the bikeway miles by phase. So showing you kind of what stage of delivery was the project in during FY21. So whether it be under design, construction, or open to the public. So as you can see, more than half of the program is in that design phase. And as Chris previously presented, we have many in that final design phase that are getting ready to go into construction very soon. So I think next year you'll see a big shift with additional miles moving into that under construction category. And then on the chart on the right, we see bikeway miles delivered by fiscal year. So this is when we plan to open up the next set of mileage by fiscal year. So did want to point out that in FY21, we did have an increase in our bikeway miles delivered as we opened Inland Rail Trail Phase 2 and then also the Rose Creek Bikeway. So we were able to increase our overall miles delivered by over 5 miles. So that's great news there. And we have several miles coming up in this next fiscal year that will also be open to the public. And moving on to the second section here, we've summarized the bikeway miles that are in the final design stage with the city of San Diego. And so at the conclusion of FY 2021, we had 7 projects that were with the city under final design review. Since then, though, we have already received approval for the Barrio Logan. So this first line here, we've received approval of that. And we're very close to downtown Imperial as well as a few others here. So it is our expectation that all 7 of these will complete review with the city this fiscal year, which is really great news. And although they aren't shown in this report, the city did complete review of the Pershing as well as Border to Bayshore bikeways within the last fiscal year. So we are making better progress at getting those plans through final design, and we'll see a big completion of a lot of these projects this fiscal year.
Very well. I'm sorry, go ahead. Do you have more?
Okay. And then looking at our leveraging for the bike program, we don't have a leveraging goal for the bike program, but we still like to report out to you to show how successful we are at leveraging outside funds. So we currently, TransNet represented 58% of the total program funding at the conclusion of 2021, meaning we were able to leverage 42% of the funds from outside sources, which is great news. And this is continuing to kind of trend up and up as we've been able to secure additional ATP grants and outside funding sources even just this fiscal year. So you'll continue to see the outside funding sources make up more of the program funding. And then looking at the support to capital ratios for the bike program, we have 2 categories here. So those projects less than $10 million and then those more than $10 million, considering that most of the bike projects are less budget intensive than the major corridors side. So pretty consistent on the projects less than $10 million, staying right there in that 69 to 70% range. Which is pretty typical considering the tremendous support costs that go into delivering many of the bike projects. And then those projects, $10 million or more, we saw a slight increase from 43 to 48%, which was indicative of us fully funding projects that are kind of coming up on beginning construction. So a few of those increased slightly, which kind of brought the percentage up. As we kind of have been able to gauge what those support costs will really be now that we have a few of the bike projects under construction delivered and under our belt. So that's kind of the reason for that increase there. And then looking at the construction contracts versus engineers' estimates, we didn't award any new construction contracts for the bike program. However, we did continue construction activity for 4 of the projects. So there was lots of construction still going on with Inland Rail Trail, Rose Creek, the Georgia Mead and Landis bikeways, as well as the 4th and 5th bikeways. And although we don't have new data this year, we do anticipate 4 new construction contracts being awarded within this fiscal year. So expect a lot more data on this in the coming year. And then lastly, the schedule milestone attainment for the bike program. So looking at our advertisement milestones, we did have to reschedule or push out the 3 planned milestones for advertisement to FY 2022. But the good news is that the Pershing Drive Bikeway as well as Barrio Logan Bikeways have been advertised already in this first few months of FY 2022. which is great news. And then downtown Imperial is slated also to be advertised within FY 2022. So 2 out of 3 are underway, and then we'll get that next one very soon. And then on the open to public side, we had 2 planned openings, which we accomplished both. So again, that being the Inland Rail Trail Phase 2 and then the Rose Creek Bikeway. And we will have a couple more openings slated for this year. So great progress to come for sure. And with that, I'll conclude my updates and any other questions that you might have on this report.
Thank you so much. First of all, are there any public comments?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Mr. Orso, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
I have one question and one comment. The question is, when does any of these report trigger an action, since they're all in the rears looking? Do you have something that projects, that triggers an action that says, hey, we're not doing good here. We're not going to be meeting some of our milestones and we need to do something.
Right. So yes, you're right. This is kind of a backward looking at the previous year kind of summary of what's actually happened. But on a quarterly and actually even a bi-monthly basis with the PMs, we do have individual kind of project risk management processes where we look at the schedules, we look at the budgets, and work with our PMs to try to minimize those risks as much as possible. But we are also working on how do we best implement our risk management process for our entire capital portfolio project. So we're still kind of evaluating what the best way is to kind of implement a formal risk management process. But us in the project office do work very frequently with our PMs and corridor directors to evaluate the key risks to all of these projects.
Kelsey, I applaud that. I've been bugging Ariana for something like that since I got on iTalk. So I appreciate what you're saying. And I do believe that having that risk management approach would be very, very helpful for the program. And the other one is a statement, a suggestion, a request. When we get the quarterly reports, I would like to see them outside of the consent and actually get a presentation on them, please.
Okay, definitely.
Thank you.
This is particularly for the bike program, Pedro? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, for both the major programs, the major corridors and the bike program.
Okay, all right,
Thank you.
very well. Mr. Halpin, go ahead, please.
Thanks. You know, I just want to say that, you know, we've struggled somewhat for quite some number of years to really get our arms around the progress or lack of progress in the bike programs and refining the presentations to be more clear as to what's going on. And I just want to say that this is really a fabulous step forward in really presenting, and as well for the major corridor presentation, just really excellent presentation. So whatever team was involved in putting this together, I just think this is a really, really great result. And I've got to say, although, you know, Chelsea did a great job presenting it, the best presentations are those where you don't even need anybody in the room to talk you through it, that it's so clear. And I think this is a good example of one which really, even if Chelsea didn't do the presentation, the clarity itself of the infographics is just really so wonderful that it stands on its own. So really just big gold stars for everybody involved.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the quarterly TransNet financial report. We're about 10 minutes behind. It's unfair to the next presenter, but hopefully we can have a precise and concise discussion and presentation. Go ahead, please. Andre, is that going to be you or
It's going to be me, Ms. House, Marcus Pasquale.
Marcus? Go ahead.
Having a little trouble sharing my screen right now.
Okay.
Let me see. Okay, I think, here we go. Can you guys see my screen? Is the agenda?
We're seeing the agenda.
Okay, great. Okay, so good morning, members of the iTalk. I have prepared the quarterly TransNet financial reports for the period ending September 30, 2021. This is in response to recommendations from the first and second TransNet triennial performance audit. Some key considerations this quarter is our debt to revenue ratio is 3.13 times, meaning for every $1 of debt service, Sandag received $3.13 of sales tax revenue. Cumulative fiscal year sales tax revenues through September 30, 2021 came in 23.1% higher compared to last fiscal year through September. And you can see here in the fiscal impact box what those figures were, 100.3 million this quarter versus 81.4 million last fiscal year. All cities and the county are within the allowable 30% limitations for maintenance spending, and all jurisdictions except for Carlsbad, Coronado, Escondido, and San Diego County are above the 75% spending threshold, but are expected to meet the threshold by the end of the fiscal year. So at this point, if there are any questions on any of the attachments, I'd be happy to pull them up. But if not, I will go ahead and conclude my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Are there any public comments on this particular item?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay. Are there any members of iTalk that may have questions, comments? No, it looks like you did a good job, Marcus. Look at this. Thank you so much for your presentation. You caught us up as well, so I appreciate that. Item number 15 is future meeting schedule, and Julie will take us pretty much down the line home. Julie.
Sorry, I was having a little issue here.
No problem.
Okay, so our upcoming meeting, as stated on this slide, is January 12th, 2022. We're still not knowledgeable as to if this will be a virtual or an in-person meeting, so we'll have more to come on that. But right now, looks like we're concluded with the meeting.
Okay.
Chair House,
Yes.
it looks like Jim Linthicum would like to say a few words.
I saw the hand. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Mr. Linthicum.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to conclude the meeting with letting the iTalk know that this is going to be my last iTalk meeting ever, at least as a Sandag employee. I'm retiring at the end of this year. And I think I've been doing this for 42 years. It's all been about delivering capital projects. My first capital project was the original construction of the Trolley South line from downtown San Diego down to the border. And that opened in '79. And my last big project is Midcoast. So it's been a great career. And I've had the pleasure, I've been very lucky to have some involvement in almost every single TransNet 1 and TransNet 2 job. So I've been very fortunate. But what I really wanted to say is, I just want to thank you all for everything that you do for Sandag and for the region. I really appreciate the tone you've always set, you and your predecessors have always set, where you invite us in and we tell you about the status of the project. And I'll just talk about the capital program for now. We tell you about the status of projects and we have conversations because we don't always bring you good news. And your predecessors had to hear about some of the issues with the Sprinter when that was going on right after TransNet 2 passed. And those were difficult conversations, but you're always open to the conversation and the problem solving. You always made it safe to come to you with problems and solutions. I just want to thank you for that. You know, what you're doing is just so important. And Sonny, you and I have had this conversation before. I really support everything you're doing with iTalk. And because what you're doing is you're working to improve things to make sure that the taxpayers are getting their money's worth and the best bang for their buck, which is what our goal is. But it's great to have outside experts help us with that. And staff really, really does appreciate that. So thank you for your hard work. Thank you for the generosity and the courtesies you've always shared with me. And maybe I'll be tuning in, but just not as a panelist. Thank you. I'll hand it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Linthicum. Mr. Orso, go ahead.
Mr. Linthicum, I knew you were going to say something like that when Midcoast finished. I knew you were waiting for it to be your last hurrah. I applaud your career. It's been incredible. And you have always had a smile, even when those difficult decisions and discussions were being made. Please let me know what your plans are in the near future. And if you're having a party, because I would like to be there to celebrate with you.
Thank you. I am not having a party. I appreciate celebrating projects and teams. And trust me, I'm only saying this to you. I'm not looking for any feedback. I was just saying to you because I sincerely appreciate everything that you guys do and have ever since iTalk was formed in 2004, 2008, I forget when we formed iTalk, but anyway, thank you, Pedro.
Well, thank you. I had completely forgotten about this, Jim. I'm glad you mentioned it. Congratulations on such a long, distinguished career that you've had. You have personally impacted the mobility in San Diego quite handsomely. So appreciate all your effort. I'm disappointed you're not going to have a retirement party because I would have wanted to be there too. So, but we're going to miss you, and hopefully we'll continue to at least see you in different forums and continue to really enjoy your friendship and your expertise in our industry. So thanks again for all your efforts. Appreciate it. We're gonna miss you.
Thank you, Sonny. Thank you. Thank you.
Who's gonna be there? Nobody can replace you. What's gonna be there?
I trust that this joint can always use some new blood with some fresh ideas. And whoever replaces me, or whoever we're restructured, it'll be positive.
Very well. And we have some additional comments congratulating you in chat as well. So thanks.
Thank you.
And I wish you all a happy holiday season. We're going to see you in the new year in 2022. Here's hoping we're going to have a wonderful, successful year coming up, and we're going to deliver more and more exciting projects. So thanks again, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.